Earlier tonight, a co 9/11 researcher, someone who I highly respect, did a response video regarding Jason Bermas and John McDermott, who wrote an article critiquing loose change. McDermott wrote an article critiquing loose change in which Jason Bermas was a producer on. And one of the points raised in Nelson Martin's, who goes by the name of DJ Thermal Detonator, in which I'll link below at the video as Patreon, in which just to add a little bit, his videos on Patreon. But I would submit to you that it's well worth your $1 or $2 or even $5 to subscribe to this guy, because I think he's the best researcher around. One of the points raised in the critique video that Nelson did regarding plane crashes. This was a specific point of argument regarding Jason Bermas and McDermott, in which Bermas happens to think that Flight 93 was shut down, and that Flight 93, the crash site in Somerset County, Shanksville, didn't have what they call general obvious debris, large pieces, like other plane crashes have. But this is the argument for most people in the truth movement as well that don't believe a plane crash in Pentagon or in Shanksville. This is a huge mistake, and I'm going to try and point out in this video why it's disingenuous to compare plane crashes, especially when the anomalies regarding these plane crashes greatly differ as to the circumstances surrounding them. Most plane crashes that happen inside the United States or even around the world are plane crashes that where the pilots are trying not to crash the plane. And so you'll see most plane crashes happen at the belly of the plane or on the side of the plane, going at low rates of speed. And you'll see large pieces of the fuselage, even the hull intact, wings, tail, whole engines sometimes. With Flight 93, that obviously wasn't the case, because the plane was going at high rates of speed, fully loaded, by a hijacker pilot that actually wanted to crash the plane. To compare this plane crash with, say, a normal plane crash would be disingenuous. This plane crash involved a hijacker pilot that was going, I think, exceptionally fast at 580 miles an hour at a 40-degree angle into the ground, with the plane carrying 18,000 pounds of fuel. So basically a bomb, a missile loaded with kerosene. The plane actually exploded into a fireball. If you looked at the plane crash, you would notice that hardly anything survived. Didn't even look like a plane crash, as most plane crashes would, because that's what we're generally used to seeing. We're not generally used to seeing hijacked planes crash on purpose. It's a rare anomaly. And for this to be really skipped over in the arguments of no planers, that's what I call them, is highly confusing to me, because I can understand why they're holding on to this position, because a lot of these people don't want to be wrong. And two, this is what dominates the conversation spectrum, unfortunately. There are dozens and dozens of documentaries and films made by erroneous people in the leadership of the truth movement that purport no planes and no hijackers. It's unfortunate. This is a reality that we have to live in. To compare Flight 93 with plane crashes, well, my good friend Nelson Martins actually pointed out a great scenario that happened in 1987, December 7, 1987, with Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 1771, or PSA 1771. I'll also link an article that Nelson wrote, which was in a response article to a TAP member, a 9/11 TAP member, her name was Allison Maynard, in which she claims that Flight 93 never crashed in Shanksville, and that Nelson used this plane crash to compare with Flight 93. Why? Well, Flight 1771 was hijacked by a gunman who purposely crashed a plane which nosedived into the ground in San Luis Obispo County in California. What did they find in that crash? Nothing. There was basically very little of the plane left at this site. They managed to find light debris, papers, ID cards, which is what they found at Flight 93, no less. 43 people were killed at PSA 1771. With Flight 93, it was 37. 44. 44. So basically almost the same amount of people. In regards to Flight 1771, there were people who actually saw the plane nosedive into the ground. You had one guy that basically said that it looked like a missile or a dart into the ground. Well, there were people in Somerset County who actually saw the plane crash into the ground, including one Kelly Levinite, who I will quote, "It was low enough. I thought you could probably count the rivets. You could see more of the roof of the plane than you could see the belly. It was on its side. There was a great explosion, and you could see the flames. It was a massive, massive explosion. Flames, and then smoke, and then a massive mushroom cloud." Val McClatchy had been watching footage of the attacks of the plane and then heard the impact. And so you have other eyewitnesses like Eric Peterson, who's a coal miner in Pennsylvania, Somerset County. He saw the plane crash in the field. Paula Pluta. I mean, you could Google these names yourselves. I'll just name them, and I'll even post a couple of links to articles about Flight 93 eyewitnesses. Nevertheless, a plane did crash there. But Jason Bermas actually states that in his video with McDermott, he states that he'll stop showing clips of these people saying that there looked like no plane crash had crashed there if somebody could show that there was actually a plane crash to compare it to where there was no plane left. Not only does Nelson show this in his rebuttal video quite succinctly and with great detail, there's also another plane crash that I usually bring up sometimes. And that's Germanwings Flight 9525. This was a hijacked airplane, and it wasn't really hijacked. It was actually the pilot of the plane that was suicidal, and he crashed the plane on purpose into the side of the Andes Mountains in March 24, 2015. And when you Google this, you'll see the plane debris, very much like PSA 1771, very much like Flight 93. Very few pieces of the plane. No tail, no wings, hardly any fuselage. In fact, the biggest piece of the plane was compared to the trunk of a car. And that was part of this, I think, part of the wing that they found. A wheel was found. Clothes. Very light debris. Nothing that looked like a plane had crashed there. Very much in a way of like PSA 1771, like Flight 93, or like Flight 77 at the Pentagon. Even though the irony is that they found more pieces of the plane with Flight 93 than all the other sites in New York and Washington. So, does Bermas actually go and interview any of the residents of Somerset County? No. In fact, he misquotes Wally Miller, who's the Somerset County coroner, in Loose Change, in which he says that, there's no whole bodies at this crash scene like they are with other scenes. Why would you expect whole bodies at a plane crash going 500 miles an hour, nosediving into the ground. I mean, you really have to construct or weave your way out of like being using common sense here. And I can understand why, because you're not used to seeing hijacker airlines crash at high rates of speeds, fully loaded, crashing into the ground. Just doesn't happen. When was the last time that happened? Very rare instances does this happen. So that's why we're now used to seeing it. And that's why it defies belief for most people who compare plane crashes. Because, like I said before, most of those plane crashes have the pilots who are trying not to crash the plane. And that at least they're in control of the plane, and that the plane's going at low rates of speed, 200, maybe 150 miles an hour. Flight 93 was going 500, I think 560 miles an hour. PSA 1771 was going 700 miles an hour, breaking the sound barrier. That's in Nelson Martin's critique video. And so, with Flight 93, yes, there was no whole bodies. You're not going to get them, because if you see the whole plane is basically going nosedive right into the ground. So basically what's happening is plane goes right into the ground. Everything at the bottom is now to the beginning. So in other words, like taking a can and you're crushing it against your hand, right? And you're basically crushing it, right, into a hard surface. And what happens? It's a flat circle. With Flight 93, being that it was holding 18,000 pounds of kerosene, and going by the eyewitness testimonies saying that the plane exploded into a massive fireball, what do you think happened? Nothing basically survived. It is a miracle that, and a testimony to Wally Miller and the Somerset County mortuary team, that they managed to find approximately 600 pounds of flight passengers and crew. Everyone got a death certificate. That didn't happen in Flight 77. That certainly didn't happen in Flight 11 or 175 in the World Trade Centers. So that's unbelievable that they got through to that and recovered that much. And you basically had debris of the plane. I mean, they found a corkscrew belonging to a flight attendant. One of the airphones on United Airlines was found. ID cards of passengers. A flight attendant, C.C. Lyles, her attendant card was found. So basically, light debris can survive plane crashes. It's not unusual. In fact, that's what usually happens when you have a propagating explosion. Especially if all the passengers are on the back of the plane and crashing down, the explosion happens. What do you think? All that force and energy of the explosion is going miles into the air, like a bomb. And the mushroom cloud, which you had one person who shot a great photo on I think it was on a highway or roadway, and you could see the smoke cloud just basically going downtown Somerset County. And the plane was holding, I think, I want to say 3,000 pieces of mail approximately. And also, the plane is also partly made of nylon and other light effects that were carrying in with the wind, which was going basically anywhere between 10 to 15 miles an hour that day. High up in the air, it's going a little bit more. So you had the debris field that was basically paper. All the major hard debris was found at the site. And so this is a huge argument within the truth movement, because a lot of people in the truth movement say, well, hey, this don't look like a plane crash. They're lying to us. And just figure, just to think also, let's entertain that for a second. That means that the 1,500, approximately 1,500 investigators at the site They're all in on it because they're basically what they're doing. They're sprinkling plane debris. They're sprinkling human remains of passengers and crew. Even on the treetops, they found clothes. So that means they're on the treetops putting clothes on them. Nobody says a word. Even with the media getting there, nobody says a word. They're all in on it. All these people you would have to basically, civil servants, by the way, public civil servants, and nobody came right out and say, basically we manufactured the site. And that would have to happen at Flight 77 and in New York. And that means you're basically involving now in the thousands. Because all three sites had the largest investigations in their state's history. From the federal and state level, when you don't have to invent or manufacture anything by just allowing the planes just to crash there without being interfered with interceptor jets. That's all. The amount of hoops you have to jump to make these sites manufactured that nobody ever saw, that nobody even exclaims happened. In fact, it's the opposite. The people who were at these sites saw the plane crash. They saw it in Pentagon. They saw it in Shanksville. And it's sad I have to make a video like this to tell you that there are different anomalies regarding plane crashes. I can understand why people make this mistake because most people, like I said before, are not used to having plane crashed on purpose or with a purpose, going at high rates of speed. And that's exactly the difference. The difference is, one, the trajectory of the plane, and two, the motivation behind the person driving that plane. And sometimes it's not usually the motivations. I mean, there's mechanical error, technological error that happens on the plane. But basically, you do have pilots who are trying to steer away from hitting a building or hitting a mountain, a hard surface, and they're basically trying to land. There was a famous movie called Sully, which is starring Tom Hanks as the pilot who I think he was taken off out of LaGuardia, and as he was basically ascending into the air, his engines come into contact with birds, and both engines fail. And so what he does is that he couldn't reach an airport in time, so he basically slowly piloted the lane into the Hudson River, away from the buildings. And everyone survived. It was basically the pilot's brilliance of saving everybody in that plane and knowing how to land the plane even under exigent circumstances. But that wasn't the case with Flight 93, obviously, because the operation was to crash planes into high-value targets. That was the whole thing about 9/11, was to hijack the plane and crash them into the most sensitive areas of the United States. Well, I would say that they partly succeeded, because here's another irony, that it wasn't basically just about 4 planes. There were more planes that were going to be hijacked. And that's the whole irony of no planes and no hijackers, that the operation was bigger. And that's something that me and Nelson have been working on for a very long time, trying to tell people. And I just did a video last week on one of the anomalies, United Airlines Flight 23. And you can watch that video in which I explain further in detail. But I just wanted to just clarify with this video tonight about the sheer irresponsible nature of people who don't believe a plane crashed in Pennsylvania and in Washington, D.C. And also, by the way, this is another obvious error these people make. Most no planers I've ever run into, probably all of them, and this is not a generalization, it's coming from my experience only. They love to blame Israel for the 9/11 attacks. Well, guess what? If you don't have hijackers, you basically absolved not just the Israelis, who are monitoring the hijackers, by the way, using moving front companies, in which I also made a video regarding urban moving systems, explaining that in fuller detail. You don't have the Saudis, who are financing the hijackers, in which I also did a video regarding that with Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi and the Saudi intelligence. You basically absolved the CIA, who are monitoring the hijackers abroad and allowing them to come to the United States without telling the State Department, FBI. Guess what? All of that doesn't even exist. Not just the hijackers. These rings don't exist. Who are you blaming for 9/11, by the way? That there's no hijackers? I'm just wondering. So I know you love to blame Dov Zakheim. Like he's actually remote controlling the plane somewhere, like a video game. I mean, it really defies belief sometimes with you truthers who propagate these theories. And this is not a blight on the 9/11 truth movement. They all don't believe this. I mean, there is again, from my experience, there's a large faction of people that don't believe in hijackers or hijacked planes. And it's unfortunate, really. And that's basically this video is done somewhere from the people who follow me on my channel and who watch my channel. This is basically reaching out to you, the people who don't believe in hijackers or hijacked planes. I want you to think for yourself and don't listen to anybody else. You don't have to believe what I say here. I mean, you can basically look it up. I'll give you the links to look at. I'll provide them. I'll provide evidence for everything I say. But you are the one who is basically on your own, and you're going to have to make the decision about what to believe and what not to believe. I mean, you can believe anything you want, but what do you know? That's the difference. If you're looking at a crime scene, are you basically going to listen to the words of somebody who wasn't there? No. As a responsible investigator, what are you going to do? You're going to listen to interviews of people who were there. And the people who were actually in Shanksville, at the Pentagon, and even in New York, all saw a plane crash at each of those sites. It's just a fact of life. There's nothing you can do to change it. I mean, usually when I'm presented with a no-planer, it's like he's challenging me. It's not much of a challenge. It's not much of a challenge at all. And it gives me no pleasure to correct him and to be braggadocious about it. I'm not doing this for points. I'm doing this to help people, to make them learn of the error in which they believe. Because, unfortunately, like I said before, the 9/11 spectrum regarding conversation, regarding films and videos, is dominated by the conspiracy theorists who espouse no planes and no hijackers.